welcome into our overtime segment here at SportsSource.tv. We appreciate you joining us. Joined myself by Mark Pankratz, Mike Griffith, Josh Ward, Bob Hodge. Glad to have all you guys here. Or as I introduced you on the show today, Josh Ward. So glad to have all these guys here. This segment always brought to you by Blue Smoke Cigar and Smokin' Joe's. They do a terrific job. If you enjoy a fine cigar, which I occasionally do, the best places in town to get them. You get in Knoxville, that is Blue Smoke Cigar. It's their latest venture. It's out West Knoxville, South Peters Road, right near the Raffertys. They do a great job in terms of having a lounge, a members club there, where you get the walk-in humidor, but if you're a member of the club, you also get the leather seats, the 5 million televisions, card tables, games, golf games, everything. It's really neat. And if you're in Alcoa, the best place to go is Smokin' Joe's. They have a beautiful walk-in humidor as well. Really good for prices, really good for selection, and good folks. I mean, that's one of the things we do on the show. And I know people are like, you say they're all good folks. That's why they're on the show. I'm as a one-man business, if I've got somebody that I think's a pain in the rear, or I don't really trust, or I don't really like, they're not on the show very long. So it's the beauty of having these folks on here for 10, 12, 13 years should tell you that, wow, John really, really likes these folks. It's true. And Smokin' Joe's, that's a company that's been with us for a long, long time. Mike Hicks and his family do a great job. All right. We asked for a few questions. We got 3 to start with. First of all, how are hoops schedules determined? And I think that this was written in such a way that it might have 2 meanings. So we'll start with, how are the schedules made out, Mark Pankratz?
Well, obviously the SEC gives you the conference one, but then the non-conference, it's a combination of many things, whether it's some relationships with the coaches because they want to have their coaching fraternity or buddies. You've got some in-state schools that you often want to get on the schedule. But then it really is doing your homework on the RPI and trying to find a way to get enough big-time schools where you're going back and looking at who do they got coming back, what's their recruiting class looking like, who they have sitting out, and trying to schedule it that way. And then also just trying to find some that might be surprises and to help that RPI. But some head coaches are really involved. Some guys it's just kind of off in the distance, but it's a combination of many things.
Didn't you do, one of you, you were involved in the scheduling?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. How involved was Gonzo?
Very involved. He wanted to know. You had to put together basically a 3-page document of all information about each team that you were presenting to him to play, not only personnel but style, because styles affect it. But it was very detailed.
I remember that was one of the reasons why Conzo missed the tournament one year was the schedule strength, and then so he turned his interest to you, probably turned to you. That was one thing the pro staff did really well when you play these teams from the mid-majors. They're not all created equally, Mark. Some of them have much higher RPIs than others.
Yeah, and so you got to look not only at the team, but you got to look at the conference they come from, because who else do they play, because that affects their RPI. So it's not as easy as just saying, hey, I'm going to take some from them.
How involved was Bruce?
Bruce was not as involved, but he was involved on the front end of teaching you what he looked for, because he did it at Milwaukee too. He always had really good schedules.
Okay. And then this question, the way it was phrased, it could mean this as well. They're talking about comparing common opponents, like when you're comparing opponents. And I'm wondering if they're asking about strength of schedule in terms of the strength of schedule. And really, it's like any strength of schedule rating. It's a computer that spits it out. So it's whatever you type it, whatever your formula is, that's how they're going to judge it. So when we may look at, well, you won at Kentucky, that's great. But if Kentucky's RPI is low, then it's not going to help your strength of schedule as much as it helps the eye test, if you will, or just the overall, well, they won at Kentucky. All right, that's the perception. Yeah, but Kentucky's down this year, if we're talking about a hypothetical here. Kentucky's down this year, so the actual numeric value isn't as great as what you might have in your perception. So you do look at common opponents, and I'm sure in the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee, that's one of the things they do. They have the printouts with all the information, all the data, but also they have the schedules listed, and you can sit there when you're comparing School A to School B, they could do the printout, and here's who they played, when they played them, et cetera. So all of that plays into the strength of schedule format that they use on Selection Sunday. Next question. Do you foresee, does anybody else want to jump in on the schedule thing?
I was just going to add it's your opponent's opponent. So the fact that Tennessee played North Carolina and Georgia Tech, they benefit from the ACC schedule strength. The bad news is all you've got left is SEC teams, and the SEC as a whole has a poor RPI. So that's what really hurts Tennessee as they raced for this bubble spot.
And it goes back to like why people, I know we want to see Kentucky lose because we're Tennessee fans, but really Tennessee fans should have been cheering for Kentucky last night because we needed them to beat Kansas because that ultimately helps us.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would add that I've said before, I think that's something to compliment Rick Barnes on, that he brings a level of credibility. I think Rick Barnes' name has more credibility than Tennessee's name does when you're trying to put a schedule together, like the series they have now with North Carolina, the Seattle and Nashville series with Gonzaga. Rick Barnes' history allows that to happen for Tennessee.
Let me spin off that for a second, because if we talked about the NCAA bubble earlier today. If Tennessee winds up literally on the bubble, let's say they get through these next 10 games, they go 8-2 or 7-3, and then they make the championship of the tournament. All right, so you're on the bubble squarely. People like to think the tournament selection committee bases stuff on this. As we said earlier, 90% of it is the numbers. There's a reason guys all do these. Jerry Palm, Joe Lunardi, they're only wrong on 1 or 2 teams a year. There's a reason. It's not that hard to figure out who's in when you look at the numbers. But then you get that 1 or 2, 3 or 4 of those last slots in. Do you think Rick Barnes' name would help Tennessee get into the tournament or not? Mark, that's closer for you. As somebody who's watched it, did you ever feel like, oh, well, this is Jim Boeheim, they're going to get him in, and it was based in reality other than just jealousy? Because I'm sure that stuff gets said. But do you think that your coach's name has any real value, or would that be year to year different depending on the selection committee?
I would truly hope that it does not. If you have a committee that's trying to get the best teams in there, I hope it's not based off of name. If they do have that part of it, I wouldn't want a different coach than Rick Barnes, because as far as his name and his integrity within the profession, there's none better than Barnes.
He's not only respected, he's well liked too, which all that plays into it. There are guys that, well, Bruce Pearl wasn't an extremely popular guy with other coaches. You would look every year at the AP rankings and then the coaches poll rankings, and his were lower in the coaches poll week after week after week. Some guys are popular with other coaches, some guys are not. I would guess the same thing. If you've ever had an NCAA issue, the NCAA may look at you a little differently than they do somebody like Rick Barnes, who's been clean. So I think if it can't hurt you, obviously. I just don't know that it would help you.
Yeah, after the Mississippi State game, which Tennessee won, Ben Howland complimented the way Tennessee plays, and I read that as a compliment to the way that Rick Barnes coaches them.
Absolutely. All right. Do you expect, this is another question from our folks, do you expect more changes on the football staff? Bob Hodge, you haven't been chiming in on basketball schedule. So your thoughts on the football staff? You see any more coming? Because you got a couple of contracts.
If there are any more coming, it will be within the week, I think. I think you get through signing day. If you're going to make a change, you make it soon after signing day. I'm going to go out and say no. I don't think you're going to make any more changes. I think you shifted your around a little bit. You had your opportunities. It doesn't look like there's a recruiting, and Josh, you and Michael know this better than me. It doesn't look like there's a recruit that, well, if we let this coach go, we don't get this guy. It doesn't look like you've got that situation out there. So I think Tennessee will probably stand pat, but if they make a change, look in the next 7 days.
Still talk about Stripling possibly stepping up or out off the field role or possibly retiring, and Mahoney still sitting out there with an expiring contract. Those would be the two I would think you would be keeping an eye on if there are moves. Do you anticipate moves, guys?
Yeah, I would think with Don Mahoney as well, that's something that Butch Jones has kind of struggled with because of the history they have. You also have the contract situation, which I would think Mike would come into play with what Tennessee ultimately decides to do there. But I think that's something that maybe even Butch Jones has gone back and forth with.
Yeah, I'm thinking 1 or 2 more changes, John, but I think Josh is right. Mahoney's a guy that's been with Butch Jones for a long time, and there have been some other changes on the staff. You do want a certain degree of continuity. That does help as you try and bring that carryover from one year to the next. But at the same time, Butch wants to build a championship staff, so some hard decisions for Butch Jones, I'd say, in the next week, Bob. I agree. I think if it's going to happen, it's going to happen before the next show.
And I think Stripling, I don't even see that so much. That's a different kind of thing. I mean, Mahoney would lose his job. I think Stripling stays if he wants to stay. If he wants to retire, move into something else, so a little bit different right there. But I was a critic of Mahoney's, but you also got to say his guys got better towards the end of the year, I thought.
He got better as the schedule got worse, I would agree.
No, there you go.
Well, and we mentioned this a couple weeks ago on the show. you hired a new strength guy in Rock Gullickson. If you've worked with Mahoney for a long time like Butch Jones has, are you looking at this and saying the issue last year wasn't Mahoney, the issue was what we did, what I did? Hopefully if he's looking at it, he's probably saying what I did with the strength situation, and we're going to let Mahoney stay and fix this. It's a possibility that you're looking at it. If you've worked with someone for a long time, you like them, you trust them, obviously you have. Now he's also shown he doesn't have a problem letting long-time assistants go, but if you're looking for a reason to keep him, the fact that you had to make a change at strength coordinator and you heard talk last year, even before the season, that they weren't strong enough, and that's something that Mahoney said. Said that on Sports Talk, I believe, that he knew in August they didn't have the strength that he wanted. Okay, well that sounds like perhaps that's him. Perhaps that's his spin. Wasn't my fault. It was the strength guys. Either way, that's what makes that position interesting to me, because you've made a change. That you're grinning. Am I wrong or what?
No, I think you're right. I think that's exactly what he's saying. It wasn't my fault. It was the strength coach.
Yeah. So I think that you get into it and you're left wondering: do they side with it was the strength coach that was the problem? It was both, Mahoney. So that's where you are. I anticipate one more change. The fact that he's sitting there without a contract doesn't look good for Mahoney, I don't believe. But we'll see.
Mahoney wondered aloud before their first August scrimmage, I want to see if this team can be physical enough. I think that was him as soon as practice began, wondering, okay, where are these guys physically? Now, the answer in terms of who's to blame, it could be both. It could be that the strength. I don't have much doubt that the strength program needed to be better heading into the season. Perhaps the offensive line coaching needed to be better as well. That I'm not as sure.
It'll be interesting to see where they go. And we keep looking at the offensive line here, but it'll be interesting to see where they go because, they had a lot of with DeBoard in. They pulled their guards a lot. They even before this year, 2 years ago, they pulled their center. When you put Coleman Thomas in there, you pull in the center some. So you're thinking, okay, you want them a little lighter, a little more athletic. Gullickson likes big, beefy guys. We showed the thing during the season. Here's Mike Stoll when he was at UT. Here's Coleman Thomas today. And it looked like Steve Rogers. Then you give him the serum, and it's Captain America. So it'll be interesting to see what that line looks like shape-wise next year. Last question that came in. I mean, it's interesting. Jalen Hurd, Dietrich Mostella. One leaves on his own. One is dismissed. In both cases, the team quickly seemed to turn things around. Now, that didn't carry very long with Tennessee because you eventually lost to Vanderbilt. But your thoughts in terms of addition by subtraction, in terms of team chemistry, and I'll start with the former coach down there, former D1 player and coach, so you've seen it both sides. Talk to me, you don't have to get specific in Mostella and Hurd, but is there any comparison to be made there when you see guys go from a team and all of a sudden the team runs off 2 or 3 wins in a row? Is the addition by subtraction thing a reality?
Yeah, and I think these are two opposite ones. I think Dietrich was just subtraction of skill set. The inconsistencies, what we've talked about with this basketball team all year, that is what Dietrich Mostella was. He was inconsistent. One night he put up a bunch of points, but he's given up the same amount on the defensive end. The guys all liked him, from my understanding, in the locker room. He just was so hot and so cold, and you've seen these last couple games where we've made some of the most improvement. Ball handling, which was not Dietrich's strength, and defense. Teams have scored 40%. Kentucky and Kansas State combined 40% against Tennessee last. That's not Dietrich Mostella. So I think it was skill set for Dietrich, where everything's been talked about with Hurd. It was more about the culture and the guys wanting to play with him. But sometimes subtraction is one of the best things that you can do.
Guys, your thoughts on a Hurd-Mostella comparison?
Yeah, with Mostella, I would say it's more the basketball side. I've wondered that here the last week. Well, on the defensive side, I think you see guys that are working and getting the job done. In the backcourt, maybe there has been more consistency. There's probably that impact. With Jalen, I still don't know how much blame should be there, because they did appear to play better football right after the opponents were not that high level either, and they still lost the game to Vanderbilt, and I don't think Jalen Hurd had anything to do with that. I think that's something that's easy to point to and maybe was an issue that became more noticeable as the team's struggles started to become more noticeable.
I think that the Jalen Hurd situation led to Tennessee's offense changing a little bit. I think when Jalen Hurd was with the Vols, There was a certain number of carries that I think Butch Jones felt like he had to give to Jalen Hurd. You saw a lot of carries to Jalen Hurd on first down. Once Jalen was gone, I think that enabled Mike DeBoer to really open things up. And I think Tennessee's offense became a lot harder to predict, certainly on first down. I think you could look at the production and see they were that much better regardless of the opponent. Mostella in that situation, I think it's a push. I think what's happened is, Rick Barnes plays a lot of players. These are more minutes for guys like a Lamonte Turner, a guy I really like who has a lot of savvy, Mark, and I think brings a lot of the same things as Mostella in terms of that explosivity. Still needs to get better on defense, but I think this enables more guys to play, and because more guys are playing, that's always better for team chemistry. That's my take on this.
And from a coaching standpoint, I like what both Butch and Barnes did, because if guys aren't going to abide to what you have set up as far as your program rules, Dietrich was drugs or whatever it was, you get rid of them and you don't ask questions. It got to that point with Hurd too. They made a decision to get rid of them as opposed to keep trying to turn something into something that it's not ever going to be. It's just going to cause more friction against within the locker room. And so for those coaches to get rid of them being really good players for them, it says a lot about those two coaches.
Okay, let me give you one last one quickly. See if I can make this out. Worst case scenario for Vols making the tourney: 7-3, 1-1 in the SEC tourney. Finished 20-13. I think okay. 7-3 be 19-13. Is that right? 19-12, then you lose in the tournament. 19-13.
Depends on who you're
If you went 1-1, you'd be if you don't count Chaminade, you're 12 and you had 7.
It'd be 20-13
Yeah.
after the SEC tournament.
Right.
Yeah, but in that 7, is one of them Kentucky or South Carolina on the road? Because
Yeah.
that goes a long way.
Right. So is that the worst case scenario, 20-13? I don't think you're getting in with 14 losses. I don't think your RPI is going to be that good enough. If you have 14 losses, you will have lost to real duds, or you will have missed on your chances to beat Kentucky and South Carolina the last 2 big games you get. So I don't see 14. I'd say you probably got to win 8 of your last 10 and then go 1-1 in the
Well,
tournament.
John, in that RPI, and Mark, you might remember this, that one year you played in the SEC tournament, you had to play LSU, and it dropped your RPI like 10 points even though you guys won the game.
That's a good point.
Tennessee still got to play Missouri.
That's
They
a
got
good
to play
point.
some lousy SEC teams, and some of it could be the luck of the draw who you play in the SEC
Yeah, you
tournament.
could get some real duds down there. That's a good point. That's why I think it's such a long shot. If you could only get that Ole Miss game back,
Arkansas.
the Arkansas game, because then you flip flop with them in the RPI. If you could go back, that Chattanooga game that was so early, if you could get that one back. But I do think if you're looking to desperately get in here, I think you almost have to go 8-2, and you better beat either South Carolina or Kentucky on the road among those 8, and then you still better you can't do a one and done in the SEC tournament. So it's a long shot. It's a long shot, but they're on the bubble. I mean, that's better than anybody projected. This team was picked for 13th in the SEC.
Yeah, and it's why I wouldn't call North Carolina a moral victory. Because imagine if you had that win. I'm not saying you should be critical of Tennessee for not winning the game, but there was an opportunity cost by not pulling that game out. If you have a win against North Carolina on the road plus Kentucky, those are 2 big boys for you.
And you look, this team has, and Rick Barnes talked about it earlier, they got to learn how to win. They don't value winning enough. That was kind of his comment. I thought that was a little harsh. I thought it was more about, and he's kind of a harsh coach. He kicks him in the butt. I thought it was more about learning to win, because you go back now and you look, you played Oregon tight. You played Wisconsin tight. Gonzaga, #1 in the RPI in a lot of these systems. You played them tough. North Carolina on the road. If you got those guys again, played them 10 times each, I don't know that you're not winning 1 or 2 out of those 10 or more. So I like certainly you have to like where the program's going, but I think it's a little early to be looking at NCAA. I think it's one of those rare years when you look at the NIT and go, okay, that's a good stepping stone for this program. Nobody ever likes the NIT, but I think this would be a year where you said, yeah, okay. Mike disagrees?
The way they're playing right now, I think if you're right, if they could do the do-overs, but right now they're playing at an NCAA tournament level. Right now.
So you think they will make the NCAA?
No, I just think, I don't know if the way they're playing right now would leave those players satisfied. Those players
I didn't
right
say
now
they'd
believe.
be satisfied. I'm not talking about the players. They're never going to be satisfied. They want to win the NCAA tournament. Most fans do too. I'm saying realistic people shouldn't be mad you go to the NIT this year if you're picked for 13th. If you wind up in the bubble discussion of the NCAA and wind up in the NIT when you're picked for 13th in year 2 under this guy, that's a good year in my opinion.
I think it also helped that those losses really hurt the players. When they lost to North Carolina, when they blew that lead against Arkansas, Ole Miss, that hurt those players. So they didn't say, well, we weren't supposed to win, so that's okay. I think that helped them develop along the way as well.
And I think part of him being a harsh coach who kicks them in the butt, saying they don't value the win, I think that all goes together. I think he knows how to get these guys. I think he knows when to light the fuse and when not to.
I think his specialty as a coach is he knows how to figure out each player and to take the pressure off them, to just let them go play and play hard, play for the right reasons. That's what Robert Hubbs, it's his skill set, but Robert Hubbs is playing with no pressure. He's got unbelievable confidence now, and I believe that's because Barnes has poured into him. He's figured him out, and that's a hard thing for coaches to do.
Thanks to Mark Pancratz, Mike Griffith, Josh Ward, Bob Hodge. Appreciate you watching us here on Overtime. If you guys could pass these down, these are the rundowns I forgot to give you before the show today. I just found them in my stack. You'll really like them. We'll see you next Sunday, 11 a.m. on WATE 6. Thank you very much.